18th. And if you want to learn more about the program, go to Lesley edu. And of course, it's great to see students and faculty members and alum in the virtual house. I just have to move something on my screen here, excuse me. Want to acknowledge the presence of our Dean, Sandra Walker, who is here with us tonight, the Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Social Sciences. Hey, Sandra. And our readers will be introduced by faculty member in poetry, Stephen Kramer, in just a few minutes. Some housekeeping. Be aware that tonight's reading is being recorded, as are all of the readings in the series. For format, there'll be a first reader, and then a second reader, and then conversation between the two. And if there's time remaining, we'll open up to questions for the readers from the audience via the chat, as we've been doing. So now I want to invite Professor Stephen Kramer to the meeting, introduce our readers tonight.
Hi, everybody. Tonight, I am introducing Erin Belieu and AJ Verdelle. Erin will read first, I believe, right? Yes, Erin and then AJ. Erin is the author of 5 poetry collections, all from Copper Canyon Press, including her forthcoming Come Hither Honeycomb. Poems from the book have appeared in Poetry, Kenyon Review, American Poetry Review, the New York Times, Best American Poetry, the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day, and Narrative. About Erin's poetry, the New York Times has written, her gifts for clarity, consolidation, humor, and moments of hard-earned feeling are old-fashioned ones. She's a comedian of the human spirit, in league with poets from Frank O'Hara through Deborah Garrison and Tony Hoagland. AJ's first novel, The Good Negress, won 5 national prizes, including the American Academy of Arts and including from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the Bunting Institute of Harvard University, and the American Library Association. Her essays on subjects including slavery, art, and motherhood have been published widely. She has novels forthcoming from the Random House imprint Spiegel and Grau, and as we know, she has a book on Toni Morrison forthcoming. Publishers Weekly wrote this about The Good Negress. In a particularly accomplished debut, Verdelle imbues her ambitious novel with a confident style, finely realized characters, and a strikingly original first-person voice. Consistently absorbing and beautifully detailed, Verdelle's novel brings universal truths to an affecting study of adolescence. So take it away, guys.
Hi there. Can you all hear me? Hello?
Yeah. Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can. Go right ahead.
Sorry, there was a little lag time on my end. Welcome to my bedroom, everyone. I realized in this challenging moment, as everyone calls it now, I don't have a natural zooming spot, so I guess this is gonna have to be it. But I don't know about you, but I love peeking at people's houses. Do you know what I mean? Like, one of the great highlights of the pandemic has been secretly looking at people's houses, so I've been kind of digging that myself. Thank you so much to all the people at Lesley who work so hard to make these things happen, the residencies happen, but particularly a residency under this circumstance is no small amount of work, and we are very grateful for everything that Danielle and her team have done. Also a special thank you to Craig Garland, who I think I really don't, I don't know Craig very well, but I also realize my life won't function at all without him at this point. So I'm very grateful to you, Craig. I'm gonna be a good poet and start my timer now so I don't go over my time. All of the poems that I'm reading tonight are from the forthcoming book, Come Hither Honeycomb. Usually with my books, I feel like I have a lot to say. I've got a lot of patter. It's not so true with this book. I think generally with Come Hither Honeycomb, I was trying to think about how to describe it, and the best I can come up with is these were all poems written over a great period of sadness. And then at some point, the poems got a little less sad, and now they're a little bit happier. So I don't know if you will see or feel that progression, but that's what we're dealing with. The first poem, oh, and one thing I was going to say is that for reasons I'll explain later, there is a slight inaccuracy. We had a literary trivia game last night, and there is a slight inaccuracy in one of the poems that was caught by the copy editor, but I don't have that copy with me. It's a small one, but I'm going to ask at the end to see if anybody figured out what that is. This first poem is called Instructions for the Hostage. It's a villanelle, and I was so tickled that, you know, I'd sort of been waiting all my life to have the lines that were both flexible and specific enough to work with this particular form, and because writing a good villanelle is extremely difficult, and hopefully this is a good one. So this is called Instructions for the Hostage. You must accept the door is never shut. You are always free to leave at any time, though the hostage will remain no matter what. The damage could be managed, so you thought. Essential to the theory of your crime, you must accept the door is never shut. Soon you'll need to choose which parts to cut for proof of life, then settle on your spine, though the hostage will remain no matter what. Buried with a straw, it's the weak who start considering their price. You're no great sum. You must accept the door was never shut and make a half-life there, aware, apart, afraid your captors lost you so far down, though the hostage you'll remain no matter what. Blink once for yes, and twice for yes. The heart makes a signal for the willing, its purity sublime. You must accept the door was never shut, though the hostage will remain no matter what. So this is a poem that was, I get a lot of poems from reading articles in the New York Times. This is a poem that came about from reading one of those like New York Science articles where they said every alcoholic drink you take takes a half hour off of your life. So I thought that was newsworthy. It's a miracle I'm here. So this is a poem called, oh, and it also has a little bit of Hungarian in it, but that Hungarian will tell you what it is when you get to it. It's called Pity the Doctor, Not the Disease. Science in its tedium reveals that every spirit we spirit ganks a solid half hour from our lifespan. So says my doctor, a watery, Jesus-eyed man, and hard to suffer with his well-intended scripts for yoga and neti pots, notably stingy with the better drugs, in situ here amongst the disaffected toys, dreadful in their plastic baskets. Above his head, the flayed men of medical illustration are nailed for something like decor. The eyeball scheme is best with its wondrous canal of Schlem, first favorite of all weirdly named eponymous body parts. It's just a splotch of violet on the diagram, but without which our aqueous humors would burst their meshy dams and overflow. Tears, idle tears, so sad, so fresh the days that are no more, is what I quote to him as he thumps my back with his tiny doctor's tomahawk. But he's used to me. We have an understanding. What he means to miser, I've come to spend most lavishly. And I feel fortunate again to be historically shaky in the maths, enough to avoid making an easy sum of my truly happy hours, or night curled sulphurous on my side, a price to sell shrimp boiling in anxious sleep. If we're lucky, it's always a terrible time to die. Better the privilege of booze than the whim of one more shambolic butcher shelling peasants in a wood. Our world's long spree of Caesars, starting wars to pay their bills in any given era's Rome. Turns out Lord Alfred's stomach did for him, and he died thirsty, calling for more opium. Free of the exam room now, I spot the same busted goldfish in his smeary bowl beside the door where he's glugged along for years, a mostly failed distraction for poxed or broken children. I raise my fin to him, celebrate the poison we're all swimming in, remembering the way you say cheers in Hungarian, Istan, Istan, meaning in translation, I'm a god, you're a god. I'm just going to assume there's a wild applause going on out there, right? Feel free to text me if you have my number and tell me how I'm doing. This is a poem called In Airports. It was the season for weeping in airports, for walking and bleeding in airports. The white corridors, their rocking chairs, the ghosts and trains and strangers all overcast, the windows and buzzing of people in earbuds, always the weather in airports, a stranger season she never knew. It was the season for these and what? The lady said, standing behind the long white counter, and hides and sores what left their weeping nettled prints below her clothes, red like the ghost of maple leaves raked wet from the sidewalk. It was the season of storm delays and lightning clocks, of shame and ghosts on trains hanging from the vinyl straps, clinging to the stainless poles, or buzzing in the long white rows of rocking chairs in airports, a stranger season she never knew. What was gone and where and buzzing, how it walked and wailing like a ghost, a shame, was something the lady said standing behind the long white counter. A shame, she said, and looked concerned. She heard her, what? A stranger said, and never knew, being always the weather in airports, the season, the weeping, a wet, buzzing sore. She walked on board, a shame, a lady gone, a stranger flew. So this is a poem. Let's see what the time is. Hold on just a second. I should probably turn the noise off on my phone. Okay, I know where we are. All right. This is a poem called The Man Who Fills in Space, and it has a epigraph from Guy de Maupassant from his Letter of a Madman. And the epigraph is, and from the moment everything is limitless, what remains? The man who fills in space is petrified. The outline of each table, counter, his and the spouse's nightstand, all blur beneath the mess of his collections. Covering his mouth, the man often yawns reflexively. It's hard to feel your own unease, so tedious, a house too quiet. And he is growing weightless, churlish, lapsing into sulks, as the bees that work inside him plot more often to refuse him the lullabying comfort of their swarm. But when he pokes the canker of that great blank whatever, he never hopes to find, he swears he hears it laugh, the terrible what of what is not. It yawns right back at him. The man who fills in space drips with the stalagmites he fashions for his temple. Pillars made from leisure magazines, sour-smelling foreign change, a plastic bag engorged with dead men's wallets, the treasure of his mother's broken seal-a-meal. All the stuff of him pressed lovingly beneath a pelt of dust in which he sometimes thinks to write his name. And when he leaves each night to make himself less awfully not, and drinks to make the bees return, searching for the necessary spot from which to phone his mistress. Sometimes the moon comes by, peering through the window of his car to wonder at this man who fills in space. And the man looks back at her, marveling at how lonely she must be. Those barren miles, the nothing of a few golf balls, a clutch of silent flags planted in her porous white. Though he recalls the astronaut who left a tiny silver pin behind, proving someone he can't quite remember claimed another place he'll never go. The man who fills in space, he thinks of this while considering the moon, the sadness of the object, that single sharp prick alone somewhere in the universe. This is a poem. I suppose my affection for this poem is that it's a poem for my son Jude, and I'm always tickled when I can get him into poems. He pretends that he doesn't like it, but then he is disappointed if he does not appear in my books. So there you go. This is one of those poems where the title reads into the first lines. So here it is. Please forgive me all that I have ruined, is what I wrote in a letter 4 years ago, and which in retrospect feels painfully ridiculous. The lyric flourishes absurd. Though it isn't like I didn't pony up for all my extra, I took that check for every meal, always ready to confuse the sum that someone wants from me with the balance of myself. My son and I, we've gotten good at being quiet after all those years of someone else's noise. Not unhappy quiet, but better than most at keeping still. It can feel willful at the holidays when half the time I'm left to herd the silence on my own, but mostly we ghost along contentedly through our dailiness. My son says he's convinced if we were predators, we dive more silently than barn owls, who are extremely silent, with feathers notched like steak knives that break the air to make them so. On other days, we are benign, slowly shifting from room to room, more stealthy than giraffes, whom scientists believe at most emit a non-committal hum, though their experiments can't entirely decide. Most often, drowning comes to us like this, so very quietly, while those dithering in the boil forget one decent option to consider: save yourself. Once my son went under sneaky-like right behind my back when I was lifeguard for his tiny tuna pre-K class. Once he vanished absolutely inside a rack of discount dresses at a giant mall, pretending to hang there like an affordable floral print. He watched me call and call, my terror bursting skyward, all glassy spangle and screech, a one-woman fireworks display. And because he wasn't obviously damaged, I now take pleasure in the thought of him, invisible inside those dearly purchased minutes, loosed from the flaming dirigible of my fear, the red balloon unknotted from his wrist. Which is one kind of message sent by the universe, though typically uneasy to parse. Like the cassowary at Miami's Dumpy Zoo, unknown to us before as a thoroughly accomplished killer, nature having furnished it with good-sized daggers on its middle toes, with which it's more than willing when provoked to unzip the human body like a duffel bag. And how its minders came to us before the aviary show, since we were closest to the stage, instructing us to hold completely still when they brought it out, to tuck in our feet and put our hands deep into our pockets. Really, they repeated, completely still. But how I envied it, that mindless dinosaur caring nothing for nothing but the little gobs of meal its trainer threw at the concrete stage to keep it occupied. How beautifully there, not there, the bird was, complete unto itself, a savage trick I recognize as having once perfected. The truth is, I've lost that gift. In my early dotage, my edge begins to bubble, creeping like the glass in a cathedral. I weep easily at stupid stuff. The truth is, my son only misses the dogs now. The one with eyes like ice in a glass on a bar top. The other unstoppable, who ate a light bulb whole. Theirs was such a loving, faithful chaos. It was a thing of joy for us back then to watch them run. I think this is going to be my final poem, which I think brings us in right about at the right time. Look at that. Well done, me. So this is the final poem in the collection. I think the only thing that's worth knowing is that I spent about 15 years as a competitive springboard diver. It was a huge part of my childhood and on into high school and college. And I'd always wanted to write a diving poem. And so this one finally presented itself to me. And it's called She Returns to the Water. The dive starts on the board, something Steve often said, or rub some dirt in it, princess, when in his lesser inscrutable mood. Steve of the hair gel and whistle, a man who was her diving coach, who never seemed to like her much, which was odd given objectively her admirable discipline and natural gifts, the years and years of practice, and the long row of golden trophies she won for his team. The girl she was then, confused, partly feral, like the outdoor cat you feed when you remember to, but won't allow to come inside. She's thinking of Steve now, many years later, while swimming naked in her wealthy landlord's pool, or grotto to call it properly, an ugly Italian word for something lovely, ringed as it is with red hibiscus, white lights and the mimosa trees draping their blurry pearls along the water's skin. It's 3 a.m., which seemed the safest time for this experiment, in which she's turned her strange and aging body loose. Once a man she loved observed, "You're the kind of woman who feels embarrassed just standing in a room alone." A comment, like him, 2 parts ill-spirited and 1 perceptive. But this night, she's dropped her robe, come here to be the kind of woman who swims naked without asking for permission, risking a stray neighbor getting the full gander, buoyed by salt water, all the tough and sag of her softened by this moonlight's nearsighted courtesy. Look at her, how the woman is floating, while trying to recall the exact last moment of her girlhood, where she was, what she was doing, when she finally learned what she'd been taught, to hate this fleshy sack of boring anecdotes and moles she's lived inside so long, nemesis without a zipper for escape. A pearl is the oyster's autobiography, Fellini said. How clean and weightless the dive returns to the woman now, climbing the high metal ladder, then launching herself. No fear, no notion of self-preservation. The arc of her trajectory, pretty as any arrows in Saint Sebastian's side. How keen that girl and sleek, tumbling more gorgeous than 2 hawks courting in a dead drop. Floating, the woman remembers this again. How pristine she was in pike, or tucked tighter than a socialite, or twisting in reverse like a barber's pole, her body flying toward its pivot, which is, in those seconds, the infinite, before each possible outcome tears itself away. the woman climbing from the water now, like the silvery tissue hiding a costly gift. Thank you.
Erin, that was so impressive. I was clapping for you. I hope that's okay.
Thank you, AJ.
No problem. So I guess Stephen has already introduced me. So I'm going to go on and start reading. I appreciate everybody who's here. I appreciate Erin's terrific set of thank yous for the people who have helped put this virtual residency together. Not easy, this particular effort that we're making. For those of you who are peering into people's houses, this is my brick wall behind me. This is my living room. These are my Aunt Betty's hydrangeas, which I've been hoping would stay alive long enough to match my blue shirt this evening. So I don't know if my Aunt Betty's watching, but her hydrangeas are here with us. Today is Father's Day, so I also appreciate anybody who's interrupted their commercial capitalist Father's Day moment, and I hope that there's some affection involved, which is neither commercial or capitalist. The title for my document that I'm reading from is called Father's Day, Summer Solstice, Another Pandemic Sunday, and Day ? Of civil unrest or protests in the streets. That's as far as I'm going to go with the craziness we're involved in, but on Tuesday we're having a panel and we'll go full frontal on the craziness on Tuesday. So tonight I'm reading a little section from the Toni Morrison little book that I'm writing. I don't exactly know what to call it, but it's a long essay and a short book. The first section of that book is called Never in the Morning. There are 3 sections. The first is Never in the Morning. The second is called Queen. And the third is called Love Letter, Miss Chloe. So those are the 3 sections of the book, and I'm reading a little bit from the first section. These memories that I have of Morrison are from a time where people could still make contact with each other, which sounds a little nostalgic at the moment. Toni Morrison, in her book, Song of Solomon, which was her breakthrough book, she gives instructions for how to make a soft-boiled egg, how to make a perfect soft-boiled egg. And so I'm saying that because a lot of what I'm doing in this essay is kind of paying homage to not just Morrison and her personality and what I experienced of her personality, but also Morrison and her work, because to know Morrison is to know that you cannot talk about Morrison without talking about her work. And if you try to, she will be a witch. So you have to do what she wants. Song of Solomon was also written after her father passed. It was a big dedication to him. The dedication page in the book says, Daddy. And she didn't go home for 3 years after her father passed, but she spent that time working on Song of Solomon. So in honor of that, and in honor of Father's Day, I chose a section where my own father has a little cameo, and maybe he's listening out there with my sister. He would need my sister's help. From section 1, Never in the Morning. Grieving Morrison and writing about her simultaneously has caused remarkable distillation. I am like a spectator, watching my mind casually assemble moving images of her and deliver them to me in their own emotional order. Images of Morrison I haven't seen or thought about in years float to mind unanchored, lifting of their own accord from the equal grief and gladness born of our score of years, our elastic and compressed connected time. Rememories of Morrison have caused me to laugh, to pause in real wonder, to feel a recalcitrant joy of surprise. I'm not sure I expected this from the stunning void of grief. This march of barely buried images, arising from a brand new grave. Maybe this is what I'm learning, that grief is not a void at all. Brand new silence, yes. Inaccessibility, yes. Greater accessibility too in certain ways, like freedom to think about her without feeling guilty for what I'm not doing, like unfettered reimagining and propulsion to reread. Yes to all that too. Truth and memory come to the fore though and reconfigure, twining like children with ribbons at a maypole. Maypole celebrations are almost extinct, though when done correctly, maypole ribbons have predetermined and insistent colors. The colors of my Morrison memories are also predetermined and insistent. A lifetime once ended does not lose its light. Instead, memories carry the light aloft, always ready for replay, without the burdens or the distance or the damning pressures of time. Most often in the parade of pictures marching through my memory, Morrison is in motion, and yet the real unfurls in silence. A trick of muteness my mind plays, which I take as a reminder that Morrison has really gone. Watching her move in my memory both pains and amazes me, but also simultaneously I feel a rueful kind of joy. At almost random times I see her, in a specific remembered slant of light. Almost before I see her, light arrives, defining the moment. I have to command her voice to hear her speak again. Most often I just look on quietly. I remember her pronouncements so well. I am amazed to discover that my memories of Morrison are so defined by the light of afternoon and early evening, after 3, after 5, after dark. In all the years I knew her, I don't believe I ever saw or spoke to Morrison in the morning, except once. The one time I saw her in the AM, I was visiting her at a hotel in Oberlin, which is 7 miles from where she was born, in Lorraine. The Toni Morrison Society was installing the records of the organization at Oberlin College. Morrison invited me to come visit, and my 10-year-old daughter and I planned to drive up from Washington, D.C. So far for one driver and a 10-year-old. But I told myself, this is your pilgrimage to Lorraine. After I mapped out the trip, in spite of the cost, I shifted gears and bit the bullet and bought plane tickets. I rented a car and drove to Oberlin from the airport and felt a real elation when I passed the road sign showing Lorraine town limits. I had 2 kinds of precious cargo on that trip, my kid and a bag of freshly baked yeast rolls. Morrison had 2 repeat requests she made of me when I asked, dutifully, should I bring you anything? Should I send you anything? Morrison never hesitated. On a regular day, she might ask for flowers, which I'd source and order as carefully as I could. Usually I had the flowers delivered. I had a florist that I worked with near her house. And then once the flowers were delivered, I'd call her back to find out what the flowers looked like, whether she liked them, if they were worth my money. If she was having a dinner party or a dinner or something, Morrison might ask for rolls. Rolls are a delicate matter because of how long they take to make and how long they take to master. Rolls made from scratch are increasingly rare. I am referencing the kind of rolls you start with yeast. I learned to make rolls from my great-grandmother, a woman from Arkansas who cooked for one white family for 29 years. After all that time, at the end, they said goodbye. No pension, no severance, no retirement, no financial send-off into old age. We called our roll-making grandmother my Goldie, and from her, I learned to bake this holiday bread. I have been studying and practicing making rolls for decades, committed to carrying on a mostly holiday tradition that my great-grandmothers religiously maintained. My great-grandmother made rolls with stunning effortlessness. I've strived to get there, but for me, it's work. I can make the bread taste effortless, but sweat runs down my brow and flour makes me sneeze. Morrison understood rolls made from scratch, called them yeast rolls, as many people do. Yeast rolls are often mistaken for biscuits by the uninitiated. Morrison knew the difference between a biscuit and a roll. Biscuits have craters and rely on shortening and baking powder. Rolls are smooth and depend on yeast and rising. Yeast rolls depend on their maker's attention and on knowledge of how to knead, how not to overdo. Some cooks consider yeast a finicky ingredient. Unless you are primarily a baker, which I am not, you have to develop an understanding of yeast and of its evolution as it contributes to building bread. At the grocery, planning to make rolls, I always buy double the yeast I need, carefully choosing from 2 different batches, 2 different expiration dates, 2 different brands if possible. Invariably, the yeast gets set to work during the wee hours of the night or morning, and if the yeast were to fail, there would be another opportunity using the extra that I bought. Rolls require mounds of sifted flour. If you are making rolls for Christmas, you can easily go through 15 pounds, and this flour will not be contained. White clouds leap and swirl in the kitchen air, settling in the corners, settling in the drawers, uncomfortably coating your tongue, and getting all caught in your hair. You have to understand the temperature and elasticity to work with dough. You have to check out what the dough is telling you by temperature and by its elasticity and by its height. It's important to knead sufficiently, but you must also be careful not to overdo. Rolls require 2 different rising periods in a warm, not drafty area. Timing matters mightily. After you have a sufficient first rise, which can take up to 3 hours from start to punch, you punch down in the dough to release the ballooning air. I have rings that I use to cut the dough uniformly, but with my great-grandmother, we used a jelly jar. Before they're buttered on top, cut and folded across the middle, and laid out neatly for the second rise, there's always an issue about where to cook the bread, because everybody wants to eat rolls hot. My father looks forward to holidays simply because of the rolls. He and both my sisters stand by the oven, waiting for the rolls to come out. My father can finish off half a dozen rolls before you can say, "Are they ready yet?" When the bread is cooking, you always know where my father is, standing by the oven, full stop. Morrison was having a family dinner in Lorraine. She asked us to meet her at the Oberlin Hotel at 10:30 in the morning. I stayed up the whole night before our flight working on the bread. I baked the rolls, let them cool, and packed them carefully in dozens. I filled a small shopping bag with 4 dozen fresh rolls, and at the crack of dawn, I headed to the airport with my daughter. Her dreadlocks were 3 or 4 inches long then. She wore a yellow long-sleeve shirt, khakis, and black high-top Converse, her uniform, a fight I chose not to have. This image of the kiddo, charged with making sure the rolls made the trip, has never left my mind. She was careful and earnest with her mother's hard work. Although I have infused the roll making with my urban capitalist experience, I've upgraded to cutting rings and parchment paper. Morrison recognized the roll making for what it was: Black woman's labor, a throwback to the kitchen work that fed white Southerners and that kept Black people either half or all the way alive. I think 5 or 6 times in the course of our relationship, I honored Morrison's request for a rasher of hot bread. And for this, I spent a whole day in the kitchen tending. And then at the end, back at home, I'd be wiping up flour for days. That one morning in Ohio, The only morning I ever spent with Morrison. We took the flight, we rented the car, we drove through Lorraine and then to Oberlin. We were welcomed to her hotel room by her son, Ford, who came and got us in the lobby and walked so quietly that he scared me when he called my name. Ford, I said, you walk so quietly. And he answered, that means you have a long life. He took us upstairs to Morrison's hotel room, and there were 3 or 4 very lively young women there. They were her nieces, she said, introducing us. The nieces had come to give her a pedicure. As we entered, the pedicure was already in process. We spent a few hours visiting that morning, pedicure notwithstanding. 6 women, 1 room, Morrison Central, arranged in a chair. There was much chatter, nail polish, twittering, and bird-like conversation about family, about Lorraine, and about Washington, D.C., where my daughter and I lived. The nieces were curious about who we 2 were. They were polite and welcoming, all far more adult than my daughter, but much younger than me. We talked about the society, the events planned for the evening. Morrison inquired of my daughter the various and sundry interrogations given to children: age, school, interests, intentions, hobbies, sports, books you've read. Mostly banter to see if the child will speak. The nieces called her Aunt Chloe, and of course my child will speak. For the family lunch they were having, the 4 dozen rolls were ready. My daughter got all the credit for doing her job effectively. I handled all the other logistics of the trip, and no one cared. I had packed the rolls for travel, and they journeyed amazingly well. I was tired, having lost sleep, wanting the bread to be as fresh as possible and not be day old. I knew Morrison would comment about day old bread. Morrison stuck her nose in the bag and said she could smell them. We passed the bag around, imitating her. Don't squeeze it, don't smash the bread. That's what she said. More than 2 or 3 times I'd bounded off sleepy with a few dozen fresh baked rolls for Morrison. In Princeton, on the Hudson, that morning time in Oberlin, I'd leave my kitchen smelling of heaven and snow dusted with flour to get in the car to make whatever meeting, whatever appointment I'd scheduled with Morrison. Rolls are a labor-intensive gift. You have to feel some affection to take the project on. That chatty morning in Oberlin, fresh off her pedicure, Morrison nearly skipped away with her Whole Foods shopping bag filled with rolls baked in my kitchen hundreds of miles away. Her nieces followed her out like chicks. Handmade yeast rolls are a throwback. Morrison loved throwbacks. She loved the kind of folk remembrance making rolls represented. She was always happy to reach and take a bag of fresh rolls from my hand. Oh, my request, she might say. She'd go liltingly off to her family engagement with one of her contributions, mine. That's what happened that Oberlin morning. At the end of the visit, I tried to suggest the best way to reheat them. I was going to tell her to wet a towel, to wrap the rolls and let them steam heat. Morrison put up her hand, shutting me up quickly. Child, we know how to handle hot bread. Morrison did not make the mistake of confusing rolls with biscuits. When she first learned I made rolls years before Oberlin, we were discussing an upcoming holiday. She interrogated me to see if I knew the difference, to see if I was making the reference correctly. It's a huge faux pas in the Black culinary tradition to refer to rolls as biscuits. Only people who don't cook or who don't have the folk tradition of cooking around them would make this mistake. Morrison understood fully. She understood the cooking, the rising, the difficulty, the tradition. She and I talked about the anthropology of the Black holiday table, the improvisational reality of the Black family dinner, the definiteness of the menu. She would often tell me what they had, what they ate, along with the rolls I sent. She considered that making rolls is almost a lost art. I agree. I have taught my daughter and my nieces how to make rolls. By now, they are 5 or 6 years into their apprenticeship. Except for getting up early enough to get the yeast started, they can carry on without my nattering oversight. They have taken over from me for our family. They work as a team of 3. They have rings and parchment paper and a robust supply of cookie sheets. They have a system. They can make 15 or 16 dozen rolls and still enjoy the holiday. Though they do not use jelly jars, they are reaching back 100 years into dying arts, into feeding our own family rather than the white family, into Black culinary history, learning, practicing, understanding how yeast works. When their rolls come out of the oven, my father stands at the ready. My father is unaware that rolls often make me think of Morrison now, in that unfettered way of revisiting that grief gifts to the grieving. Even as I watch my father stuffing his face with hot rolls, I am reminded of Morrison. I see her that one Oberlin morning in unsunny Ohio light, sauntering toward her family celebration with my offering in her hand. Thank you.
Thank you, AJ. And thank you, Erin. AJ, I really appreciated your statement that grief is not a void at all, or your reconfiguration of grief. And I have a question for you. I'm gonna get back to it. Also, just love that you're taking us into this domestic space and into the space of baking and flour and creating food and sustenance, and of course its connection to your relationship to Morrison. Erin, I appreciated your similes and metaphors, a sun hanging like an affordable floral something. I missed the rest of it. I loved that image and the flaming dirigible of my fear. The progressions and surprises of your poems. So thank you. Oh, you're in a new space and in the refrigerator.
I'm making a drink. I'm gonna just confess. And I'm surprised no one else is doing that, honestly, but go ahead.
You're allowed.
Okay, thank you, AJ.
My first question to you both, and I'm hoping that after that you'll talk to one another and ask each other questions, has to do with the themes of sadness and grief. Erin, you mentioned that the poems were written over a great period of time, and AJ, you're responding to the loss of Morrison, right? And taking that grief in that way. The question is, how do you think about these very, universal human experience, this human experience, and languaging it? That's my question to you. How do you think about language as you want to work through that?
I'll let AJ go first.
Okay. So I feel like all my work really starts with Jean Dielman. I don't know if any of you guys know that movie. It's an old movie. It's a long movie. It's made by this filmmaker called Chantal Ackerman. The movie lasts like 5 hours, and it's really about this woman who makes her son's lunch. He comes home for lunch. She makes his lunch. She feeds him lunch. He goes back to school. He comes back home. She makes him dinner. And the film just revisits this over and over again. So for me, I feel like I'm always starting in some sort of repetitive, interpersonal, usually domestic space. And eventually, as the projects get closer to finish, things become more compressed. But the sort of lingering in the woman's responsibility context is really where I start. And so I just build the language around that. And obviously some of that language will have to go, it'll have to get slightly more compressed. But I am sort of hanging with this notion that Morris and I would talk about and both respected, which is, you know, how is it that the Black family continues to sustain itself in a world, in a national context that is constantly denying and deriding it. So I'm often, you know, she and I both were fixated on not using Black to say bad stuff and not using white to say good stuff. So the white flower is just flying, but it's not negative or positive. It's just doing its scientific thing, that kind of thing. So I'm making a bazillion decisions about it, but it's grounded in the sort of repetitive woman's space. And then it gets compressed so that there's no confusion or excess.
Thank you. Erin, to you.
Oh, I suppose for me, is this true? Yeah. For me, most poems start with an argument or a structural choice or some kind of stricture that gives shape to free verse poems, or like in the case of the Villanelle, feeling like this kind of random thought I have in the car, being able to grab that out of the air and say, okay, there might be something here. And then not really knowing that I'm, like when I wrote this book, I didn't know that it was going to be this kind of meditative exploration of grief. But as I started to, you know, for me, and I know this isn't true for lots of other poets, but for me, things almost always go through a kind of, they have to go through a thought process in order for me to kind of start playing with them, moving around, you know, cracking them open so that they, as I follow myself through the generation process, as I'm whacking my way through that jungle, then it turns out that stuff, I sort of count on the unconscious mind to do all that work for me. And don't really know, I mean, I'm not saying anything other writers don't say all the time, but I don't know what I'm writing about until I really start to clear the path. I think one of the things that's nice about getting older as a writer is that you get more used to, you know what, you have more confidence in the path clearing process. And you're just better at it, right? Your tools, you've been using those tools a long time. So I know a lot of times students struggle with not just, you know, it's one of those things we say, which is let the poem tell you what it wants to do, let the poem go where it wants to go. And I'm pretty comfortable with that because I tend to believe in this sort of psychoanalytic model for whatever I'm going through is going to come out, even if I'm writing about a lighthouse or I'm writing about, you know, monster trucks or something. If I'm in the state of grief, it's going to go through that lens, right? And that's kind of how the end, you know, that's how the book ended up being without me necessarily realizing it until I handed it off to my press and they were like, wow, this book is full of grief. And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess it really probably is, you know, but I let others do the work on that. Does that answer the question?
So, okay. All right, here's another question for you, both, or for you each. And then I think I'm gonna, unless you have questions for each other, I think we'll open up the chat. The question is, why the genre for each of you? Why poetry for you, Erin? What does poetry do for you? AJ, why? Well, AJ, you write in a variety of genres. You write fiction, you write nonfiction. Why those as opposed to something else?
I am, you know, I started out as a fiction writer. And one of my teachers, Derek Walcott, used to call me the fiction writer, although I don't think he always meant it, you know, in Derek's fashion. I don't know that it was always a compliment, but it was a teasing comment. But you know, and so everything I did when I was younger was fiction, but I had that thing at the time where I'd be in a workshop with a story and people would be like, oh, the language is beautiful, the characters are beautiful, you know, but you're like, how did they get in the car? I'd be like, I don't know, they just got in the car, okay? They're in the car. And which is to say, but the shapes and I think now if, you know, I always have this fantasy that someday I'm gonna write a novel, ha ha ha. And I think I understand it better than I did. But for me, the shapes and forms of poetry were always a lot more intuitive. It just came more naturally to me, and so I gave up on my fiction career. What about you, AJ?
You know, I was one of those kids in the family that was forced to write occasional poems all the time. It's grandma's birthday, write a poem. It's mama's birthday, write a poem. And I'd have to write these poems and stand up and they'd be rhyming and there'd be chickens smelling all over the house. And it just so made me sick of poetry that I said, when I grow up, I'm never gonna write another birthday poem. And obviously birthday poems are not what poets usually write, but that was my childhood experience. I would have on these really stiff iron dresses and be reading these rhyming poems. It's just a nightmare. But you know, I just write, you know, I just write, and I care not enough about what happens to my writing. And to the students out there, don't be like me. You know, if you write, you should publish. You shouldn't just write. But obviously the Morrison book, as I spoke about last residency, is a book that I was asked to do. And so I'm doing it, and it's really, it is really a stringent exercise in nonfiction writing, because Morrison is like just always with her over my head, making sure that I'm saying the right thing, otherwise she's gonna breathe fire and burn my ears off.
All right. Okay. Well, AJ, your response raised a question for me. You just said you shouldn't just write, but I suspect a lot of us writers feel that they have to write, right? I mean, and I do think the publishing question is a separate question. So you're suggesting we should do both. Maybe it's not a question. Maybe it's a.
Well, for me, Danielle, for our students, it's sort of just a cautionary thing. Like, I am driven to write. And so if I'm writing, I don't feel bad. Okay. But there's so many opportunities to publish. And as long as you kind of keep your work quality, right? You don't want to publish things that you're going to be upset about, but you don't want to not publish, because there's so many opportunities to publish. And I just kind of like, you know, once people get on my nerves, I just keep moving on. So I've got a bazillion things written, and you know, I feel like it's important to kind of have a fighting posture about publication, to sort of stay in shape and stay focused on it as part of what you have to do. Just like you have to cook, right? Or just like you have to worry about whether Morrison's burning your ears off, or just like you have to get dressed. Publishing is part of the deal. And I don't think it's a good idea to be okay with it not being part of the deal.
Okay, you heard, MFA students. All right, so I think I'm just gonna open it up to the chat. Our chatmeister, Chris, is gonna share with us the first question from the to the readers.
Hey everyone. So looking through the chat, I think the very first question was from Kate Snodgrass, which was, what is the impetus to write, whether it's a poem or memoir? That is, do you see, hear, feel? What is it that you see, hear, or feel that pushes you to write?
I'll go. In the Morrison book really is actually behaving in the very same way that my novels work, which is that people start to become clear to me. And as soon as they become clear to me, I try to name them. A lot of times they're names that they get from me in the beginning, can't be sustained because I haven't seen enough of them to know whether the name actually fits. And I think as a fiction writer, I have to be very careful with the names that I choose because the characters grow into those names. So I'm very tentative about the names, but I see the people kind of moving around. And that's kind of what I'm describing about the Morrison as well. That once I decided that I was going to go ahead and work on this project, she actually started just dropping into my head the vision of experiences that we had together, things that I'd forgotten totally about. Like when everybody was writing memorials to her, Hilton Alls wrote something in the New Yorker about being in the car with her. And I had forgotten that I had ever been in the car with her. But then when he said it, just like a sheet, it came into my memory the day that she said we're going to go X place, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get in this car with this woman. Can she drive? Can she drive? And then I thought, let me offer to drive. So I offered, I said, you know, if you want me to drive, I can always drive. I've driven a lot of people, a lot of places. You know, if you want me to drive, I'll drive. And then we get up to her car, and it's a Kelly Green Jaguar. And I'm like, oh, she's not going to let me drive her Jaguar. But she was, you know, 70 something years old and smoking and talking and waving. And I was just really, really scared to get in the car with her. But obviously I survived it. But the point I'm trying to make though, is that the visions come to me almost like full blown. And then I just have to give those people space to live.
Can you repeat the question again? My Zoom conked out for a second and I only heard the first half.
Sure, yeah. Let me get back there. It says, what is the impetus to write, whether it's a poem or memoir? That is, what do you see, hear, or feel that pushes you to write?
I mean, I think some of us are just kind of born this way, but I guess for me, it's, you know, many, many poets have said this, writers over time, thinkers. Poetry is basically paying attention. And for whatever reasons, my antenna, I mean, there's sometimes in my life where it's more up than other times, but basically my antenna is always up for an image, you know, an interesting thought, some argument I'm trying to work out. I just stay in that state of being most of the time. And I'm not sure, I mean, I've been that way since I was in like 5th grade. So I'm not sure what triggers that part of it, but I know that my brain is always either consciously or unconsciously sorting through experience, grabbing things. Like I said, oh, you know, I get poems from the New York Times. I get poems a lot from just driving around. Most of the time, I think people find this weird. I don't listen to the radio. I don't do anything when I'm driving other than sit in silence, because for me, that's the place where maybe it's that kind of contemplative white noise of driving that just hands you stuff, right? So I don't know. I don't know if that's a very satisfying answer, but I think if it doesn't come to you naturally or as naturally, I think you can train yourself to that quality of attention. Of course, bad part is that it means I'm often not paying attention to things I should be paying attention to, like directions or that the stove is on. I think this is why poets get that reputation, because we're always kind of maybe not looking at the thing that is sort of practically right in front of us all the time, because, you know, whatever. That's what I think. You gonna say hello?
Erin, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
So I'm wondering about your transition from fiction to poetry, and whether your illustrious teacher, Derek Walcott, was able to help you make that transition, or did he just badger you out of being a fiction writer by calling you a fiction writer?
I think for me, narrative has always made sense to me. And for someone like, well, first of all, Derek's a genius and has a Nobel Prize and everything. So I was going to learn things from him. But I think something specifically I learned from him was the lyric notion of poetry didn't always come as naturally. It still doesn't come as naturally to me. That sort of high elevated lyric. And I think part of that is also a kind of permission, right? A permission that you give yourself. And I've grown into a greater sense of permission with that as I've gotten older. But, you know, being this like kid from the middle of nowhere in Nebraska, you know, just the idea that I would somehow be allowed to make a lyric utterance, right? Just hit me as like people would laugh at me or something. And I think that's about embracing that ambition, you know, and I'm fine. Not every poem needs to be a high lyric poem, but I feel like Derek was really good at pushing me. It's kind of like a voice teacher where you think you only can sing in this register, right? But what you learn with practice and also with being willing to take that ambition is I can speak in this way and I have a right to speak in this way, right? So I think Derek, and also the great, the great formal integrity of his writing was a real model for, you know, taking yourself, you know, my impulse is to self-deprecate and to turn things into a joke. And, you know, that's just kind of that's just sort of my defensive posture in the world. And so learning that it's okay to sort of risk, because the truth is if you're risking high lyric, you are risking a certain level of pompousness. Do you know what I mean? But you have to be willing to embrace that ambition with an earnestness that buoys you up, I guess I would say. So I think he was a great teacher in that way.
And then what about the formality element, right? Because that is true about Derek Walcott. You know, he has a lot of perceptible formal tendencies. I don't know if formal in poetry equates with form. Maybe it doesn't. But I'm wondering about your own sort of formality quotient.
And I feel like I'm sort of, I feel like every few years I come out in this regard because I'm not, because I believe in formal poetry. You know, I believe in the tradition of formal poetry. And while the majority of the poems, it's funny, we were talking about this in my seminar today, you know, while not all poems, obviously, since modernism are written in traditional received form, but still having those formal elements to your poems brings posture, it brings bone structure, it gives you a way to think about musicality, patterned music, right? It gives a kind of reason for your poem. I mean, one of the things that W.H. Auden said was a genius ear is only, this is paraphrasing from Dyer's Hand, but a genius ear is only born once a century, right? Mm-hmm. In my generation, he said, it was D.H. Lawrence, and the rest of us have to work for it, mm-hmm. right? Like if at some point we want to put that practice and awareness, I think, in relationship to our instinctive gifts, right? So I think, you know, and I'm a big believer in knowing what you're rejecting, right? There are all kinds of interesting poems that eschew that kind of writing, that eschew the sort of canonical tradition, that are brilliant and beautiful. But I have to think they're kind of, like, I think of somebody like Ginsberg, right? When he's writing Howl, you know, his PR was that he was just, you know, channeling, you know, the hipster gods. But the truth is, Allen Ginsberg had all of like Whitman and Dickinson memorized. He wrote many, many formal poems early in his youth. And I wonder, I mean, does he get to the kind of tensile strength of a poem like Howl if he doesn't understand that tradition? I think the good thing is the tradition is opened up to a lot more voices now. We can look at that tradition and not just look at old white men, right? But there are all kinds of things in the tradition that are worth knowing. And I think we're missing a lot of pleasures if we just stay, like, you know, somebody on Twitter was saying, I've never read a poetry book since before 2008, you know, and it was like, well, think about all the things you have to look forward to, young lady. Yeah. Anyway,
Thank you.
I'm talking too much. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. That was helpful. That was useful. So those are my questions. I guess you could go back to Chris or you.
Sure. Yeah. The next one, I'm gonna, while you're answering this next one, I'm gonna scroll through the 25 new messages and see if I need to start sorting them. But I'm just gonna go in order for one more. This one comes from Robbie Gamble, who asks, Erin, you said these poems were written over a period of great sadness, followed by less sadness, then some happiness. Did the poems follow your emotional arc, or did the process of working on them help to create the arc?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. Did the poems create the arc? No, I think I was following, I mean, I was veering between sadness and homicidal tendencies for a while. And so I feel like there are some poems that didn't make it into the book that are right from like 5 years ago that are just completely too hateful. You know, they're just spewing horribleness. And I think poetry sort of helped me work through, you know, grief and sadness and rage. And I see that arc in the book. And it's kind of, you know, when something terrible happens to you, you always have this feeling like no matter, I think this is true for most people, you have this feeling like, I'm never going to be happy again. Like, this is it. This is the state of being I'm going to be in. And then you think, oh, I don't know, I'm not a spring chicken. I know that, you know, I've been through some things. I'll probably come out of it. But some secret part of you thinks, this is it, right? This is permanent. I'm never going to feel joy again. And so when I started to see a couple of years after that point, when I started to see all of that anger and grief start to fall away, it was kind of interesting to watch how the poems kind of lightened up. So yeah, I think in this particular book, you see that. I mean, I didn't put the book together so that you see a clear arc there, but if you were to put them chronologically, you probably would see a clear arc there, I suspect.
So right now we have a lot of great compliments and things, but no direct questions. I wonder if Danielle has something for AJ, or Erin, you have something for AJ, or for Erin as well. I will keep looking to make sure there's no questions hidden in these great compliments that I missed.
I just really admired AJ in, I don't know if this is a question, but I really, because, you know, I'm also a frustrated nonfiction writer. And I really admired the way you sort of braided all of that together. You know, there's a real, I think for a lot of writers, there's a level of sophistication it takes where you can take sort of disparate ideas and the way you brought it all together, I thought was really interesting, because formally it's difficult when you have, you know, the Train About Morrison. You've also got, you know, thought going on there about the cultural history of Black women in the domestic role, and you've also got the family story and the idea of the roles. And I felt so much affinity with you because I feel I'm a decent baker. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can bake, but I get so stressed out around roles. I don't know what it is, right? Like,
It's hard. It's hard to get it right.
It's hard to get it right. And sometimes I think, well, anyway, you don't need to hear about my baking history, but I just was really, maybe you can talk for the students here a little bit about how, and I don't know if this is too nebulous a question, but like how you make those connections, like how you bring those things together that were so clearly separate things that kind of fold together in the essay.
Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to know that you have to do it. I mean, if you're gonna write essays, you have to be able to. I don't tend to use the word braid, and I think that's because, you know, all the time growing up, I was braiding my hair, my sister's hair, and it's very tight, it's very forced, and I don't force it so much. But I am always looking, as I'm putting down language, how does this relate to something that I've already said? Or how does this relate to something thematic that is going on in the story?
Right.
And Morrison was very, very focused on what becomes antique, what becomes obsolete, what is Black folklore, what is high-end behavior, in the Black family. How are we protecting the Black family? So those notions around the kitchen and the dinner and the sort of skedaddling off with the hot bread to have dinner with other people. And also Morrison's, you can't tell right now, but Morrison was a very, very demanding person. And it would shock me continuously that she would ask me to bake rolls, because that's like, give me 24 hours right now. It's like being in the military, 50 push-ups, you know? So
rolls.
Yeah, so to ask me to make rolls was like a huge thing. And, you know, I did it a number of times, and the way that that whole roll story keeps rolling along and is continuous is my effort to not just braid, but also to kind of replicate the effort that that thing takes, right? The other thing that's going on there that you can probably interpret is Morrison's sort of shutting you up, you know? Yes, come bring the thing. Yes, answer my question. No, you don't have to tell me that. So the essay is also sort of building around the idea of what it is to be demanding of a person, and what it is like to be a person who wants to fulfill, but who also doesn't really want to fulfill, you know, who wants another thing to do.
Right.
But once you acknowledge, I think, that you have to figure out how to intertwine your main ideas, then in the early drafts, you are really shuffling around, well, which are the main ideas?
Right.
And those are the things that you want to try to elevate. And in this instance, at this part of the story, it's really about effort, folklore, and sort of preservation of tradition.
I think that's a big moment. Some people do that naturally, but I think it's a good thing for students to think about, like stepping, even as you're generating, right? You don't want to do anything to kind of block that creative flow, but being able to step like a half a foot back from it in process and sort of look at it a little more thematically, right? And that's what I meant about like whacking your way through the jungle to make your path, right? What am I leaving for myself here that's going to let me step the next 10 feet forward, right? And I think, I mean, it's kind of an analytical way of looking at your own work, and maybe there are other ways of doing it, but it sounds like your process and my process are a little bit similar in that way.
Yeah.
We're analytical ladies.
Yep, no shame.
No shame.
Well, this is the moment to thank the analytical ladies for these really wonderful readings, for this great exchange. We will take the remaining questions in the chat and send them to you for your consideration and possible response to the questioners. And so thank you very much.
Thank you everybody for coming. That was really nice of you. And thank you for being my very first Zoom reading. I'll never forget. You never forget your first. There you go.
All right. Everyone join us tomorrow for a reading by faculty member Jason Reynolds, the current National Ambassador for the Literature of Young People, an appointment made by the Library of Congress. The reading is going to take place tomorrow at 7 p.m. Also want to encourage you to get a hold of faculty books. You can do so via the link in our my Lesley, and also on our webpage if you go to Lesley DU and then go to our program. So thank you, everybody, and see you tomorrow night at 7, students and faculty, if not soon.
Bye, everybody.